Hello and welcome to How Church Works, where we explore church ministry. I'm Scott Wylie, and I'm joined today by Jimmy Carter. Jimmy, I don't know how I'm going to describe this podcast in the description, but if I say that I'm having a conversation with Jimmy Carter, people are going to assume, I think, a different Jimmy Carter than you.
Sure.
Do you get that a lot?
I do. It has been a blessing and a curse, I always say. When I was a middle schooler and a high schooler, none of the kids my age had a clue who Jimmy Carter was. And every substitute teacher had a lot of fun with peanut jokes that I didn't understand. So now that I do more recruiting and stuff on the seminary side, people don't forget the name, and that's been a blessing. But for a while, it was a bit of a curse.
At the church where I serve, Jimmy is the pastor of Community Life. Jimmy, can you describe just a little bit about what it is that you do?
Sure. So my role at the church is actually twofold. I work with the seminary, specifically bringing community there and helping launch a program within the seminary. And then on the church side, my focus is coming alongside many of our existing groups. We have a lot of Sunday school type adult Bible fellowships and striving to drive them to deeper levels of community. So having our church members connected, not just on Sunday morning, but in homes throughout the week.
How would you define biblical community? What is it that we're talking about when we talk about finding community?
Yeah, when I think of biblical community, I think it's a term that's obviously a catchphrase for a whole generation right now. But when we talk about community, we need to say, what does the Bible say about community? And the first thing to emphasize is the only reason we have Christian community is because we have community with the Father and with his Son. That's what 1 John 1:3 tells us, is we have fellowship. John invites us to have fellowship with him because his fellowship is with the Father and with the Son, Christ. And so as we're thinking of fellowship, we're thinking of a sharing, a partnership together that's based on the gospel.
As you interact with people, Jimmy, do people tend to understand the importance of this, or is it something that people tend to avoid, or is it a mixture of both?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think the longer someone has been a believer, the more they have probably come to understand the importance of community. But I think for many, they think of community as just what I do on Sunday morning. I go, I hear a sermon, I'm part of a worship service, and then I go from there. And for many, that's where the idea of community ends. Of course, the problem with that is from the beginning, Acts chapter 2, it's been a come together, gather, study the Bible, but then a fellowshipping throughout the week. And so that's the goal, is to try to help people understand that it doesn't stop just on Sunday morning.
So your vision for the church family, your vision for believers in general, is to be involved in each other's lives outside of what happens on Sunday mornings.
Yes, absolutely.
And what have you seen to be some of the biggest obstacles to that happening?
That's a good question. I think as we address this in our local bodies, we do have to assess what are the obstacles in the way. I think for many, it's a misunderstanding of what church is. If we think of church just as what I get, we don't think of the opportunities to invest in others. We don't think of it as a body that is alive, and ourselves as individual members who need the body more than just the Sunday morning service. We need the body, and we need to be investing our gifts in others. I think another hurdle in the way is honestly just pride and autonomy. I don't think we think about that very often. But from the beginning, from the fall, humanity's response to sin has been to hide and to try to cover itself. And I know even for myself, when I know there's areas of my life that are out of whack with God's word, the last thing I want is people around to see that and to potentially challenge me on that. And so we've got to overcome that pride and that autonomy to say we need to invest together in community and let people see our blind spots, see where we're off, and speak truth in love into those areas of our lives.
I have a theory, and I don't know if there's ever been any research done, but you and I are part of a large church. I think prior to coming here, your church was at least somewhat smaller, maybe significantly smaller. And I've been wondering about the fact that believers who desire to remain anonymous, they want to come on Sunday morning and hear a good message, but they don't want to talk to anybody. They don't even want to be known. I think a large church is where they're likely going to land because it's easy to be anonymous in a large church. It's hard to be anonymous in a small church. And so it just makes me wonder if there are some particular struggles about leading a ministry like this in a larger congregation.
Yes, I think that's a good observation. And as you said, I came about a year ago from a church that for the region was a large church, but compared to some of the bigger churches out there, like where we're at now, it was much smaller. And what I found was a new visitor, they may come once or twice and they may sneak through the cracks, but someone is going to notice that there's someone new because they know every face there. The people at the door, they know who to expect. In a larger church, I've come for a year and I think I've sat next to someone new every Sunday. And that's not been intentional, but it is far easier to come in, to sit down, and then to run for the door and to maybe never be known.
And as church leaders, it's also hard to know when people have left. Has something happened, something going on in their life? But that probably just reinforces the need for people to find community in the context of the church and have a situation where they are known and loved and cared for.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that as well when we think of things like we're going through right now with crisis. There is no feasible way that our church staff can know what's going on in every single person's life. But the beauty of smaller community groups, whether that's a home group or a small group, whatever we call them, is there's a small enough group that they can be intentionally involved in each other's lives. They can know what's happening. They can know if someone leaves church, they're going to notice right away because they're so involved in each other's lives. So I think that becomes even more vital in a large church setting.
You and I are talking about community. We are not in the same room. I don't even think we're in the same city right now. I'm in Cary. Are you?
I'm down in Holly
You're
Springs.
in Holly Springs. And so we're talking over Zoom because we're talking about community, but we're right in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic, which has, I would imagine, created a lot of unique opportunities and challenges for finding and maintaining community. Have you found that to be true?
We certainly have. I think, like any church in the country, we're trying to figure out how do we do online community, and it's not the same. It's a blessing. I'm glad we live in a day and age where we can do this, but it's certainly not the same as gathering together as normal on Sunday mornings and throughout the week. So that's definitely been a challenge for existing community groups to transition them, find good solutions, whether that's Facebook Live or Zoom. I know we've tried many platforms for existing groups to find a spot where they can meet. But then also, how do you plug someone new into that? Someone that's maybe attended church for a while, but they're not involved in a community group. Now they're joining a platform that's a bit awkward by nature with people that they don't know that well. So that's certainly a large hurdle that I think every church is probably facing to one degree or another right now.
I think this last Sunday was our fifth week of not being able to gather together as a church. And for you, for me, for all of us, all of our meetings have moved online. We're doing video conferencing. And I agree with you that it is an awkward kind of a platform. And it took a lot of getting used to for me to, see myself on a screen and interact with people that way. I think I understand exactly what you're saying, how if I'm a stranger in a group that's gathering online over video, it's a difficult thing making those introductions and making those connections. How should this current time when churches can't gather together, how should pastors and attenders of churches be thinking about finding community in the midst of a time like this?
Yeah, I think this season of COVID pandemic, for many of us, it's maybe shown that we're not nearly as connected as a church body as we thought. Hopefully, that can be a wake up call to us as church leaders, a time to stop and assess, but also to members of the body to consider our priorities, to consider how we're setting ministry up in general, to not have it just be centered around the Sunday morning service, but life and community and doing it in a truly biblical way. We see in this time of crisis that we need the flock. We need one another, whether that's just the encouragement throughout the week, a friendly face, or maybe someone serving and picking up medicine or running to the grocery store. But the reality is we need that community all of the time. And so hopefully this can be an opportunity while we scramble in some cases to figure out how do we do this well now. Maybe we can develop groups and patterns and even ways of thinking that can transition with us back when we return, Lord willing, to worship as normal, to gathering together. I think that fellowship can continue and maybe be enhanced as we see what we took for granted before.
This is going to be sort of a loaded question, but would you say that the use of technology is a good substitute for face-to-face community?
I'm curious your thoughts. I'll give you mine.
I would think that it's not. I mean, it's certainly not the same,
Yeah.
right? It is a necessary substitute for a time like this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. I'm thankful we have the option of technology. And I think for existing relationships, for example, I was on Zoom with my family back home this weekend over Easter Sunday. Now, I would have much rather sat around the table with them, but it's people I've known my whole life. It worked for that. But I do think it's missing an element just of being able to sit in the same room, to read body language, to have it be an authentic relationship, an authentic interaction. It's certainly not the same. It's a good backup while we need to use it.
That's an interesting observation that it's good for existing community. It's more difficult to create new community using technology. That's good.
Sure.
But I guess one of the reasons I brought it up is I've been thinking about the fact that the transition to technology has gone fairly well, right? So in the church where you and I serve, almost all of our adult classes have shifted to online. Our men's and women's Bible studies are now meeting online. And even our community groups and small groups have been meeting online. And one of the dangers about the fact that it's going so well is what happens when we have the opportunity to meet face to face. I've been wondering how it is that we reverse all of this and make sure that people understand the importance of face to face interaction and community. Do you share that concern?
Yeah, I certainly do. I certainly do. I think it's been a blessing. I think of one small group in particular that normally meets every other week because of the logistics of travel. And in this time of using Zoom, they've gone to every week, which has been a blessing. But I know they're hungry once they get back to be able to actually gather in each other's homes. And I think we will have to be careful not to lose that element and let people become, we're not a virtual church. It's an assembled body. Although we can talk and see each other's faces through something like Zoom, it's certainly not a full assembly of the saints. And so I think we will have to transition back to that.
No, but in the illustration that you just brought up, that's an illustration of a group that may continue to employ technology in their community life. If they're meeting together face to face every other week, they could potentially add an online meeting on the alternate weeks and start gathering every week, alternating between face to face and virtual.
Absolutely. And maybe that's how we need to think of technology is it's a good enhancement to community, but it's not in the long run a good substitute. So Scott, I know you've been in the ministry for over 30 years. Have you seen anything like this?
No, this is clearly not the first crisis that I've lived through, but it's the first crisis that I can remember that actually kept the church apart. Now, I remember other things like the 9/11 incident, for example. That actually brought the church together and brought in other people. And so this is the first time that I think we've ever faced something where the church actually had to be apart from one another. Now, I will say the fact that people were drawn to church because of a national crisis does not necessarily mean that community was taking place. I understand that those are definitely two very different things. Attending church and biblical community are not the same. But no, this is unprecedented in my lifetime. Well, Jimmy, thanks for joining me today on this podcast. I hope you and your family are staying safe and healthy there in Holly Springs.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, though.
And I hope we'll be able to gather together face to face sometime soon. And to all of you listening, thanks for joining us today here on How Church Works. You can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for joining us today.